All right, guys, welcome to my analysis of Dead City 305, Imperialis. I will say that I did enjoy the episode. It was kind of a fun one. It made me think a little bit differently about what we might have throughout the rest of the season. And there wasn't a ton of Beth and TD stuff in it. Still a few things, but it's one of those episodes that's more about the plot and what's happening with Maggie's group than it is necessarily about TD symbolism. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. We start with Maggie looking in a mirror, and we see Louise looking out a window. She's obviously missing her wedding ring that she lost. But then we see that they've got this kind of town meeting going on, and everybody is very upset that the food was lost when the little earthquake happened and the street caved in. Everybody is panicking. And it's interesting, that Renata is standing in front of this mural here. I'm not going to read too much into the mural, but it's clearly just about a thriving community and people being healthy and helping themselves. We've got food on the table here. We've got kids going to school. We've got books. We've got babies. Um, Obviously, this is what they want to build, and this is a symbol of that, but things are not going well now that they lost a lot of their food. Basically, they're saying they're going to need to ration for a while. Nobody's happy about that. They're going to help them build pigeon traps and rat traps, but people are not very happy about having to maybe eat rats. So Maggie says this is no one's fault. I know we've all had weeks when we wished we had even as much food as we have now, and they just say no one's going to starve. We just need to pull together. All of that, right? Then we switch to the hospital, and Herschel's funny that he's laughing at this woman saying some other woman stole food and smuggled it out between her bosoms. Um, but Luis is having a hard time, and Herschel can tell. Herschel is very intuitive and in tune with how people are feeling. He's a lot like Glenn that way. But it takes him a while to get Louie to talk to him. So this is Renata saying that, once they weren't scared, they were acting like normal people and helping each other, and that was working until they lost all the food, and now they're scared again. So this is a problem. Maggie says she doesn't know how to get them more food, but she wants to get more walkers so that they can have electricity around the clock again. Remember, they were doing brownouts and times that the electricity was off. So they're thinking if they can get the electricity back, that will help with the fact that they have to ration for a few weeks. They're going to build pens in the subway with turnstiles, which is actually kind of fun, and we see that at the end. But Maggie also says in order to do this, they are going to have to get people to help them. So this is the place that we saw. I feel like there's a lot of symbols here. We've got the yellow door. It said haven rather than heaven, but somebody wrote hell over it, and that's definitely symbolic. I mean, they're, kind of descending into hell to get more dead people, dead walkers, right? And bring them out. But it's also interesting that they're going to end up going through this yellow door, this gold door, to get them. Just interesting. It just definitely feels like a metaphor. Maggie says if they get the right kind of people, they're not going to lose anyone. So of course they go to Negan. Um, he says it's like what the great King Arthur said: if you want to control your people, you give them bread and then give them circuses. And yeah, Negan, I didn't get all of the screenshots, but Negan and Dillard are still all about the sex metaphors and everything. Dillard is okay. So this is interesting the way they set this up. Dillard is actually very protective of the two walkers that he has. So it's Cockenspiel and Titicaca, and he says, "Look, if you're coming through here looking for walkers, leave my walkers alone," basically. And Renata promises him they're not there for his walkers, right? But this is setting this up to show how protective he is of them because of what happens at the end. And I actually think that is going to be, we didn't really see the fallout from what happened yet, but it's going to end up being a big problem. Negan, of course, is in his goofy way offering just to murder people. Um, and he doesn't really like it that they're asking Dillard for help because Negan is quite protective of Dillard. And he's just saying he's already helped you a lot and now you're asking for more. Renata then goes on to kind of threaten Negan here, and Maggie doesn't really understand what the threat is. She says maybe Maggie can make you a tuna casserole as payment, and that confuses Maggie, and you can tell that it pisses Negan off. And really what Renata is saying there is that she's threatening to tell Maggie that he killed the Damas. She has this to hold over him in kind of a blackmail sort of way. Um, and this is not, Maggie was just telling her before this that, or maybe it's after this and I haven't hit it yet, that Renata needs to understand how to handle Negan. If you can talk to him right and kind of get in his good graces, then it's not that difficult to secure his loyalty. But Renata is not doing that. I mean, blackmailing Negan is not making him like her anymore. So you can tell that there's some tension brewing here as well. Um, all right, so then they start going through people who are really tough, and many of them are quite brutal to get to help them to get these walkers, right? They're saying that they could give them double rations and offer them first dibs or scavengers' rights. Now, I did look up, it's kind of interesting. Dillard says scavengers' rights just like in the movie Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, I think. Yeah, so I looked that up. I mean, you guys can look it up. Um, the whole premise of that film, it's an old film and pretty universally it's mocked for being, not the best made film. It's kind of stupid. But basically it's someone who goes out looking for the Poseidon after, the disaster that it underwent, and they're searching for treasure. And actually it's reading the plot of that, it actually sounds a lot like the plot of Titanic. But it's much earlier. It came out in 1972. Anyway, but there are some interesting maybe parallels there. Obviously, they went out of their way to put the name of that film into this episode. And there is a lot about scavenging because it's about people who go out looking for this famous shipwreck. It's not really a shipwreck like on the bottom of the ocean the way the Titanic was. It actually is supposed to take place right after the disaster movie, which means there's still survivors on that ship. Um, but still, it's got some interesting parallels, I think, to The Walking Dead. So anyway, then they start talking about who they are going to take with them. He says they need Killer Kelsey. She is just someone who's pretty brutal. He says she went from the noose to the knife pretty easily and she can handle herself. What you see here is she's trying to kill a walker, but she actually peels back his head and his skull and exposes his brain before she actually stabs him. So she's just really brutal. Then there's this guy, they call him Reverend Anthony, but Renata says he's a lunatic. Then there's the firefighter. Now, a lot of us have been talking about the symbolism going on here. He's got a yellow hat. You can find some symbolism in the number 781, but it also feels like a callback to the fire truck from season 5 that we never learned the fate of. And then there's this gal, Negan says the cook, and Maggie says, no, actually, she's a chef, but she knows how to handle herself. And then this guy who it doesn't actually say this, but it does seem to me like he's probably a porn star. And so he's just all about his own sexual prowess. And you can tell that Maggie and Renata don't really like him. They think he's kind of an idiot and that could be a problem. Now, I do think that they really went out of their way to be specific about these people. And I do feel like that there is a lot of callbacks going on here. I don't know who this lady is supposed to represent. She's just really, really brutal. So, I mean, could be just about anyone, any villain we've seen on The Walking Dead, right? Here we have a preacher, and the obvious tie there is Father Gabriel. So I almost feel like this is sort of a dark side to people that we've seen before, and this represents, like an evil Father Gabriel kind of a thing. It also represents religious fanaticism, which is, one type of toxicity that exists in the world. The firefighter, like I said, the obvious thing is that it's a callback to season 5 and the fire truck. I feel like this woman, because this to me, it looks like she might be cutting up a walker. I don't know if that's actually what she's doing because, Maggie's people wouldn't be eating walkers, but it almost feels like a callback to Terminus to me because she's just chopping this up and it looks kind of gross, right? And then this guy, because of the inherent, sexuality with him, could be a callback to Grady and, the stuff that was going on there that was not good. So just a thought I had. I don't know if that's what they meant for it to be, but I do feel like they were really specific about who these people are, and they put in these details when they could have just said, "Oh, these people all know what they're doing. We'll take them." Right? Interestingly, we have like what looks like somebody singing here with a guitar on this side. So just some pretty interesting symbols going on here. I'm sure we could read into them more, but I'm going to leave it at that for today. So Renata says, hold off on that last guy who they call the bear. She's going to ask Fabian, but he doesn't really want to do it. And then after saying no to her, He says he wants to help. With all of you gone, I'm happy to do double duty at the armory. And of course, instantly, for me, that was setting off red flags like, oh no, what's he going to do? And it probably did for all of you too. But we get to that later. So then everybody meets in the bar, and Renata is telling Saul that she doesn't have to do this, but Saul wants to. Renata is really not sure that she wants to go into battle with these people. And Maggie says, I know that some of them are exactly the type of people you were worried about when we turned on the light in the Statue of Liberty, but they're exactly who we need for this. And I think the biggest problem that we're seeing here is that Maggie and Negan have both dealt with tough types before like this, and they do know how to deal with them in the best way, like not being manipulative. And that's why Negan, I don't think I read it, but he said you need to show them respect and they'll show you respect. You can't treat them like they're idiots and you can't treat them like they're criminals. You have to be cool with them, otherwise they're not going to be cool with you. And both Maggie and Negan know how to do this. And I think that, if there really were a problem, if one of these people were going off the rails to the point where they became a danger to other people, they would know it and they would be able to stop it in time. But Renata is not at that point. She hasn't dealt with people like this before, and they make her very nervous because she can see that they're very rough and tumble people. But all that's doing is putting up a wall between her and them. And you can tell that that they're not going to respect Renata because she doesn't respect them. Basically exactly what Negan was saying. So you can see that we've got some friction going on here between personalities. But even so, she does accept it, and they come up with a plan, which they're not going to go directly through the front doors. They're going to pull the walkers away from the doors so that they can just pick them off a few at a time, yada, yada. The key is the diversion. If you hear whistling, get out of the way. That's the walkers falling from the top of the building. And then basically Negan says they have to have courage. And he says this in a very Negan way. Everyone has balls. I'm not talking about, like the anatomy, but the ones in your heart, which only Negan would say your balls live in your heart. It's very Negan, very much speech. He's talking about courage, on and on. And see, this is the kind of speech that all of these people probably very much identify with. So, it's not really the kind of speech that Maggie would give, but this is why it's good to have Negan there because they are very rough and tumble like him. And so he's going to be able to speak to them in a way that they will resonate with, right? He doesn't like cowards. Then we see them in these box trucks all heading toward the Empire State Building. They're going to fill these with walkers. And we have Dillard asking about Renata. So she's impressive. She's always got it tied down. And he says, does she ever ask about me? No. It's cool. So we're seeing more of him having a crush on Renata. And I do feel like that is going to blow up at some point, especially because there's tension between Negan and Renata, but Negan and Dillard are kind of best friends. You can just see that this could go very badly at some point. The box trucks with the rolling back doors kind of reminded me of the wolf trap in the end of season 5, but even that is neither here nor there because all these kind of trucks have those rolling gates at the back. So they put ladders up to the next floor, and Saul goes in. Maggie tells them not to kill the walkers. We need to keep them walking if at all possible. I noted the broken glass here for Saul to get in. Basically, she goes to one side of the lobby, the firefighter guy is on the other side of the lobby, and they create kind of a zip line between the two, which she goes out on. I actually think this is a really good idea and a really good plan, and I feel like sometimes they, for the sake of, drama in the show, which of course I'm not against, they kind of do the characters a little bit of a disservice because I feel like at this point in the apocalypse, nobody would have a whole lot of problems dealing with the walkers. I mean, yeah, if you get surrounded or something, that's a problem, but this kind of plan is exactly the kind of thing I think everybody would be doing and executing on because they know how the walkers behave and the walkers do not have higher reasoning power, so this kind of thing is exactly what you should be doing to, get things figured out. So she uses flares to get their attention and she's blowing a whistle. And so the walkers come away from the doors toward her, which allows Maggie and Negan and the rest to open the doors and set up these gates that they use both to corral the walkers and as defenses if they need to push the walkers away. Saul also drops rats for the walkers to eat, which they do. And then they just start wrestling them out, through these gates and into the truck. So it actually goes pretty well. at first, right? Everybody's smiling. Dillard is calling them good sir. Easy friggin' peasy. Um, but then the line starts to slip, and it looks like Saul is going to fall and die if she falls into the walkers. And Renata starts saying, "Open the gates. We need to go get her. We need to rescue her." And he's going, "Do not open the gates. We will die if you do that." He's going to get her killed. But then the firefighter does end up, managing to pull the line tight again so that she can, go back in the other direction and get out the way she came. And Negan says, "Okay, she's going to make it." Now, this is really interesting, this whole sequence, because I feel like even though it is very relevant to what's going on to them, it still feels like a parallel to me of some kind. One thing that this reminded me of, and it's really a very small thing back during season, it was probably during season 7. They had something similar to this where they were at Alexandria and Spencer was trying to get out, and he did kind of a crawling across a line like this. Now, it was not very well executed. He just used kind of a cord with one of those, I don't know what you call them, like a claw at the end to secure it against the other building, and it ends up coming loose, and he swings down and almost gets killed. So Rick's really pissed at him and everything. But I always thought that that was some kind of parallel to Beth and what happened with Beth, just because of a lot of the symbolism and a lot of the lines, the dialogue that's around it. And this does feel similar to that. So if you think of Saul as maybe being paralleled with Beth here, I mean, she's suspended over this horde of walkers, right? And you have things like the flares, which is kind of like fire. And then it looks like she's going to die. And Renata, who is, kind of a proxy for Beth and also kind of Maggie's would-be sister here, is saying, "She's going to die, she's going to die, she's going to die. We need to go get her." And Negan is saying, "No, if we do that, we're all going to die." And then he says she's going to make it, right? And she does make it. And then we have the added symbol of the firefighter, who is wearing the yellow hat and, the fire truck. We don't know exactly how that played in or what happened to the truck, but I just feel like this is a parallel to, what happened during those missing 17 days. And it's hard to say exactly how, this is a parallel to that, and what it is connecting to, what it looked like during the missing 17 days, because we don't know. But I do feel like this is very purposely planned dialogue to symbolize something that we haven't seen yet. And the fact of the matter is that they very easily could have done this scene like they do so many other scenes in The Walking Dead, where Saul actually did die, and so they got their fuel, they got all the walkers they needed, but unfortunately they lost someone. And, of course, we see that all the time, characters that are brought on for a single episode or just a couple of episodes and then get killed off. But they specifically didn't do that here. Saul, after Negan saying, "No, it's okay, she's going to make it, she's going to make it," she did make it. She made it back. She survived with the help of the firefighter guy. You see what I'm saying? Like, I feel like this is purposely parallel to something, but it's not entirely clear exactly what, but I'm betting Beth and the horde of walkers that came through and the fire truck and all the stuff during the missing 17 days that we have not seen yet. So I thought this was a really, really interesting sequence. All right, then we go back to Louie and Herschel taking care of this baby who is very healthy. So this is good, but Herschel is still picking up on Louie being sad, and he still isn't really telling Herschel what's wrong. But then he finally talks about his wife and how he never got to say goodbye to her, which, we could parallel with Beth as well, not being able to say goodbye and her always saying that she hates goodbyes, that sort of thing. He feels like Marisol is totally wrong, or is really gone now. And then Herschel talks about Glenn, and this was kind of nice too. He says he never got to meet him, but it still feels like I lost him. You mean your dad? And he says, "Maggie doesn't know, but I still think about him every day. I just don't bring him up because I don't want to make her sad." And then he says, "She's not gone, she's not gone because you remember her. And I don't think my dad's gone either." And he says, "I mean, they are, but they're a part of us." So a lot of the themes we've seen before, and it was kind of sweet to hear Herschel talk about his dad. They start singing House of the Rising Sun, one of my favorite classic rock songs, so that was kind of fun. But they're doing karaoke, so we have a singing element here, obviously, and alcohol mixed with it. Everyone's kind of telling Renata they should take their act on the road. Great work today. Renata says she's going to call it a night because she has to get up early, basically. We're going to figure it out. So, Dillard watches Renata leave. You can tell he kind of wants to go after her, but these guys are all talking to him and listening to him. And he says, back on the force, the best of us, the undercover cops, they called us the Red Squad. So what if we call ourselves the Dead Squad? Which they all like. And then they ask him where his walkers are. They're downstairs. And they all want to go see these walkers, which they do. He says, this is my happy place, and kind of introduces them. And then he specifically tells them to go easy on Cockenspiel. And I really thought that this was going to turn into a disaster and they were going to accidentally kill one of his walkers. They don't. But once again, kind of like at the beginning, we see how protective he is of these two walkers, especially Cockenspiel. He says it more about the male walker than the female walker. But I do think that he's very protective of both. And then he says he knows it's not normal for him to be keeping walkers, but they say, hey, nobody's normal. The normal people wouldn't be here like we are, that sort of thing. You notice that this is this chef lady and she's actually wearing her chef's coat and it's got blood all over it. I mean, these guys are, they're super interesting. We're living at the end of times. Here we go. Normal folk. They already took the two-way train to heaven or hell. The earth belongs to the freaks. So he's making friends and everything, but you can kind of tell that these personalities, they are so strong and so kind of wild that this could end up going wrong if they're not careful. So then we have another scene with Maggie and Negan where they drink together. He brings out nasty Negan 5-borough burn. He says it's made from potatoes, but this is basically moonshine. So we have a lot of callbacks here to Beth and to Still. He misappropriated some potatoes, but that was before the pantry got all destroyed. It's going to change your life. And she's telling him they couldn't have done it without him and he should be proud. And they start talking about pride coming before the fall. And she says being proud of something that you did is not the same thing as being proud. I feel like I've been falling for a very long time. And she says, that's what this is, your fall from grace, your crash landing. Renata offered you a place with us. How come you turned it down? And he said, well, because Renata ain't you. And so it almost sounds like if Maggie offered it to him, he would have stayed there. It's just kind of an interesting conversation. But I also think it's because he just doesn't like Renata in general. I know that there is going to be people in the fandom who interpret this as Negan has feelings for Maggie, and I don't really think that's what he's saying. I think he has come to respect her and care about her, not necessarily in a romantic sense, but I think it's more that, he also tells her that she should be in charge rather than Renata, and she knows he's right about that. So I think it's really just more about the fact that he doesn't like or trust Renata very much. I care about this place, the whole new New York City thing. I still think you tricked me into it, but it is starting to feel like home. But the thing is, here we go, that he says it's you who should be in charge of the circus, and I know you know I'm right. Then she says, will I go blind if I drink this? That's a direct callback to Still, right? And he says, yep, 100%. Now is the time I need you to admit it. You would be lost without me. And she says, I admit nothing. I expect nothing less. And then after she drinks it, she pretends to be blind. So, just really interesting callbacks to Still and Moonshine and the two of them connecting some more, her and Negan, basically. He says, I've never seen you cut loose before. Is this what you used to be like before all this went down? And he says, I think we would have been friends in another life. So I know that there are people who, on TD, who are a little bit disappointed with this episode because we wanted more talk about Beth, perhaps. And this is really all they're giving us, leading into the AU episode. It's just that they would have been friends in another life. And I know people are asking, how can it be from Negan's point of view? How would he know what Beth looked like? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they don't care. Maybe, in his head, he doesn't know what Beth looks like, but they just still decided to bring Emily back to play her. Which, in a way, even though that I know that people are going to say that doesn't make a ton of sense, it's maybe not supposed to make logical sense. And all that tells me is that they didn't need to bring Beth back for this, but there's a reason that they did, and we all know what that reason is, they're leading into something bigger with her return. So, if it is from Negan's point of view and it just doesn't make sense why he would know what Beth looks like. I mean, to me, that's almost more evidence that they're going somewhere with it because they clearly didn't need to do that. And if they were worried just about being logical and realistic about him knowing what Beth looks like, then they probably wouldn't have done it this way. On the other hand, I mean, do we even know for sure that it's from Negan's point of view? I know that that's what everyone is saying, but as of this episode, we aren't really being given 100% certainty on that. I will say that the preview for next week does show that the AU part is not going to span the entire episode. It looks like it's going to start out with Negan in the bar again. And then after that, jump into the AU. So probably just the first few minutes won't be the AU and then the rest will be. So I'm assuming that they'll give us the context for it there. So we'll just basically have to wait and see. But this really is the only intro that we're getting before they go into the AU episode is, that he thinks that him and Maggie would have been friends in another life. Then she gives him crap about that. Then we have Renata going to check on Fabian and, where he is on duty. And he says he saw a couple of walkers inside the wall, but it turned out to be plastic bags that got stuck on street signs. The resolution isn't great on these things. And she says, well, I'll see what they have on sale at Radio Shack. And then she says, you've had a long shift. Let's get you home. But it's because she knows he stole some food. So basically what he did is he planted the bags, told those other two people who were there to watch the wall to go kill walkers, what he thought were walkers. And while they were gone, he went down to the pantry and stole food and put it in his apartment. And Renata has already figured this out about him. And so he accuses her of like hitting on him basically. And she says, no, I don't want to come inside because of that. I want to come to take back the food you stole. I don't know what you're talking about. But she just kind of lays out that she knew that he was going to do this. And she gets mad at him and saying, even beyond the theft, what if, there was nobody watching the cameras at that point? What if there had been a breach in the wall or someone had looted the armory? That would be on you. I know you tell your children that stealing is wrong. I did it for them. I did it for my family. And she says, you don't think that everyone here wants to feed their families. Anyway, goes on, but she gets after him for not pulling his weight, not being willing to live as part of a society. Everyone has to sacrifice, on and on. But we see him saying, what about Maggie? And he says basically that he didn't want to come here. He wanted to stay at the Bricks, but everyone else, including his own family, wanted to come and talked him into it. He says Maggie is poison. Get me the food and we'll talk consequences in the morning and you won't have to see a jail cell. So he does bring her the food. And the next day, she just basically makes him confess in front of everyone and call himself a thief. And you can tell that Maggie doesn't really like that she made him do this. I don't think it's necessarily the best answer either because it's putting shame on him and he's already not feeling great about this. And also it could make people turn on each other. So anyway, he does this thing and then she says, I know, but it keeps us all accountable. Better this than hanging. And Maggie says she doesn't really like either one as a solution. But then she also says that this turnstile thing they set up in the subway is actually working really well to bring walkers in. So they won't have to, keep going to get walkers like from the Empire State Building. The walkers are just coming to them and getting trapped in the system. And she says, it's got me thinking Fabian wouldn't have done what he did if we had enough of what we need. He was scared and I get it, but now we've got a solution to at least half the problem. Yesterday's hauls should keep the lights on for a while. And now that we've got the right group, Negan and all those guys, I bet we can keep these pens full year round. And then Renata starts expressing more concern about Negan. This is where Maggie says, you got to know how to handle him, right? And meet him on his turf. So we're still seeing Renata not liking Negan. So there's tension there. And Negan doesn't really like her either. So then we see Herschel painting something and he tells Louie to come and he says that he found an old photo of Marisol and he made this painting for Louie. So that was really sweet. And, we see Herschel and his art skills again, and he's trying to help give Louie closure about his wife. Here's another symbol from Still. We have Negan playing darts with his own picture in the middle of the dartboard, which is kind of funny. And then Fabian comes in and wants a drink. And he says, I think it's going to be a funeral. Who's the lucky corpse? He says, how many people fit in a coffin? You got to stop talking like that. Who's got you so down? Um, and he says, I hope it's not what Renata made you do, basically. They're going to forget that in a week. Here's what you got to remember. We're all just scumbags fighting for a little bit of shade at the end of the world. And then he starts telling Negan what he told Renata. I didn't ask to leave. I would have stayed at the bricks. We all should have stayed. We had it good. Um, and Negan says, I don't know, man. That's not what I heard. It wasn't perfect, but is this? And he said, we were surviving. We weren't starving. And when we were, we weren't trapped on an island. We could have made it work. But then Maggie, dear sweet old Maggie, and you see Negan, his whole countenance change when Fabian says that. Maggie had to have some kind of better idea. Um, I know what everyone thinks of me now, that I'm dog shit, which could be a dog star reference, right? They say that a couple of times here, because I tried to feed my family. Now they won't look at me. I wonder how Maggie would feel about that. So Negan starts playing along like he doesn't like Maggie either. You can tell he's faking it, but he's trying to get Fabian to, you know, admit to something. He says she doesn't have feelings, but Renata is the one making you do the whole song and dance. And this is really interesting because not only is he, obviously this is a very Negan way to try and draw Fabian out and defend Maggie, but he's also trying to put it on Renata. Because once again, we're seeing that him and Renata don't get along. So it's just interesting that he tries to steer Fabian toward hating Renata instead of hating Maggie. That's like his first tactic. But it doesn't really work. He's going, no, 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 no. Renata is the symptom. He still hates Maggie more, right? He calls her stupid and he shouldn't have followed her lead. And Negan says, I'll tell you what, I'm happy someone else feels the way I do. Would you believe it if I told her she stabbed me in the back, not figuratively, stuck me like a pig? And he says, typical. When I was a kid, I have a favorite, Uncle Scooter, and he taught me a word to use for women just like Maggie. And I bet you know that word. And he says, yes. And that's when Negan hits him in the head with the bottle, which this is small and probably reaching, but looks exactly like when Beth hit Gorman with the bottle of suckers. That's what this reminded me of. Different situation, obviously, but still. Um, so the two people who were in the bar run out, and he puts a gun to Fabian, says, you are dog shit. You are the shit the dog shits out after it eats its own shit. You think you're going to kill Maggie? Answer me, tell me the truth. Um, and then Renata comes in and tells him to put down the gun. And he tells her that this guy wants to kill Maggie and you too. And she says, is that true? No, he's lying. Of course, Fabian denies it. And she says, you don't know that he wants to kill us. And he said, I know a killer, but you don't have to be one. So, I mean, you can just see that the way that this is spiraling. She's been telling Maggie this whole time that Negan is a killer and that he's a loose cannon and something's going to happen. And we can see that this is happening because he's defending Maggie. This is not him suddenly becoming a loose cannon, but she is not going to like the way that he deals with this. And he calls himself a killer, call it a hobby. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm out of practice. And she says, this isn't a joke. And he says, no, you are the joke. The Crow was a lunatic, but he was right about one thing. You and your people are just way too soft, And she says, last chance. This is not how we do things. And he, of course, kills Fabian. Now, here is probably the most interesting thing about the whole episode, especially when it comes to Beth. They are trying to tell us things about what went down. I can promise you that. Because if you kind of take a step back and look at what happens, Negan certainly was not trying to kill Dillard's walker, Cockenspiel, but he did by accident. The bullet passed through Fabian and hit this walker in the forehead. It's on the right side rather than the left, but other than that, it's pretty dang close to where Beth got shot. And again, this is the Cockenspiel walker, and a glockenspiel is a musical instrument, right? So in terms of Dead City, you can tell, obviously this is going to cause a problem, right? They set this whole episode of very strongly with Dillard being very protective of his walkers and wanting to defend them, and he's going to be very upset that this walker has been put down, even though it was an accident. I don't know if he's going to specifically be angry with Negan for that and it's going to affect their relationship, or if he's just going to have a meltdown about it, like a Lizzie style meltdown that his walker just got killed. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but you can tell that they're setting this up as kind of a disaster, at least in Dillard's mind. But again, if we go back to the Beth thing, what happened here was Negan shooting one person and accidentally hitting this walker. And we have seen suggestions of this sort of thing before. So it just makes me think that that's really what happened with Beth. I mean, there's been all kinds of, theories about what happened and why, but I do feel like she was kind of hit by accident because we've seen suggestions of this template before. That someone else was being aimed at and she, stepped right into the line of fire. So I feel like they're kind of showing us that. And so I think this, even more than, the firefighter rescue and, anything else I've said, I feel like this is the strongest tie to Beth, showing this walker get shot in the forehead by accident. And clearly, there's going to be some fallout from this. The aftermath is probably not going to be pretty. And, you could say that about season 5 too, when Beth got shot. So, very interesting that they're showing this here. And, obviously, even aside from Dillard, Renata is not happy about this. She is very angry that he just killed Fabian. She says, "You're coming with me, you're under arrest." And he says, "You're out of your mind. I will put down any soul that even thinks about locking me in a cage again." So you can just see the fight coming. Obviously, Maggie is probably going to be on Negan's side about this, but Renata is not, and she doesn't like him. She says, "I'm coming back with people and guns, and you will come with us." And he just says, "Yeah, bring your army. Basically, bring it on." This is a very gnarly picture of Fabian. And then we go back to this walker. So going back to the walker, I mean, it emphasizes this several times, which I think is an emphasis on remembering what happened to Beth, but it's also showing that something about this in particular is going to be a problem. And that's probably going to be between Dillard and Negan. So, like I say, the preview for next time does show him, Negan, being in the bar. So I'm thinking what's going to happen is that Renata and her people are going to show up to try and take Negan, arrest him. And then after that, somehow or other, we will go into the AU of the episode. And I'm very excited for it. I'm very excited to see where it will go and what it's going to give us. But you can kind of see where this is going. So we said, and I've said a couple of times because of the structure, that the last 2 episodes, we were kind of thinking they would be about something different, maybe something more Beth related, maybe something that's a little bit different than the basic plot structure of Dead City season 3. I actually don't think that anymore. I think what they're going to do is they're going to do the AU episode and then they're going to come back and we're going to see the fallout from this scene. This was a very pivotal scene in the season, right? Because everything's gone okay up till now. They've mostly been successful at setting up this community. There have been problems they've had to solve, but they've managed to solve them relatively quickly, like by the end of the episode kind of a thing. This is not going to get solved quickly, okay? This is like the disaster that they're going to have to deal with now. And it's not a disaster of walkers breaking in, and it's not even a disaster of not having food and supplies. They've managed to get everyone on board with the rationing, and they found power, and they're growing crops, and they're being successful. So it's not bad. It's a clash of personalities, and this is going to might turn into something of a civil war. And I'm wondering if, in a lot of ways, it could lead to the separation that we saw foreshadowed at the end of the last episode with Maggie and Negan on one side and everyone else on the other side. I'm also thinking that, I mean, you can see that there's going to be dividing lines all over the place. Dillard and Negan have always been on the same side since they met, but is he going to be angry with Negan about killing his walker? And then we know he has a crush on Renata. If it's Negan versus Renata, which side is Dillard going to take? And then, of course, we're going to have Maggie, who I think will be more on Negan's side about this, but she's also got to try to keep the peace between people, and I think that's going to be really hard. So you can just see that this just really blew up, right? But like I said, it's less about walkers or supplies or anything on the outside. It's like going to be a civil war here on the inside. So really interesting. I think that's about all I have for this episode. There were, like I said, fewer TD things, but it was still a really interesting episode. And I do like that they were focusing on this. And yeah, I'm excited for what next week's episode will bring us. So that's it for today. I hope everyone enjoyed the episode. And as always, feel free to tell me if you picked up on anything I missed, and I will do some more videos, YouTube comments and asks later in the week. All right, everyone, have a fabulous rest of your weekend, and we'll talk again soon.